We have a bit of breaking news right now as Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz just walked out of a marathon meeting in Saudi Arabia where they negotiated with Ukrainian negotiators and seemed to have arrived at a ceasefire proposal that is now going to go over to Russian negotiators to see if both parties can agree to an actual ceasefire in this now 3-year plus long war. Let's take a look at this clip of Rubio and Waltz after the meeting talking about what happened.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Okay, now let's pull up this tweet from Jackie Heinrich of Fox News, who points out two interesting takeaways from a joint statement that Ukraine and the United States put out, I should say, after the meeting. Jackie pulls out this quote: "The United States will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine." And this was the other quote: "Both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources to expand Ukraine's economy, offset the cost of American assistance, and guarantee Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security." There's a lot to talk about here. I want to start with Secretary of State Rubio saying the ball is now in Russia's court. That's pretty interesting, of course, because over and over again over the last several weeks, and not entirely without reason, by the way, as Slavoj Žižek and here on this show and others have made the case, Donald Trump and the Trump administration have been accused of doing the bidding of the Kremlin, especially as, for example, the United States did put that pause, which is reversed here, according to the statement, on intelligence sharing and security assistance to Ukraine. Now, what actually looks, and by the way, referring to Zelensky as a dictator and then kind of laughing that off, seemingly, and of course the Oval Office blow-up that is seared into everybody's collective memory at this point. So that pause on intelligence sharing and security assistance to Ukraine appears to actually have been a pretty successful point of leverage. Based on this, it seems like, and this is Trump being extraordinarily unorthodox. That was a very shocking move from the United States. But it looks like that actually was something then that was able to be used as a bargaining chip, even though that would be completely off the table with virtually any other president or virtually any other administration. It looks like that was successfully used as a bargaining chip to hash out a compromise with Ukraine on this. And then also, of course, as Jackie Heinrich points out, that mineral deal, which was the subject of the blow-up in the Oval Office between J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and Volodymyr Zelensky, which Zelensky, importantly, then wrote a letter to Donald Trump as the Trump administration asked him to do, saying to basically come back when he was willing to actually negotiate for peace. Well, it's just a couple of weeks later, and in Saudi Arabia, it looks like the U.S. and Ukraine are very much on the same page. In fact, they're literally on the same page because this is a joint statement. Not an easy thing to do when you're negotiating between two parties that have had such hostilities over the last couple of weeks. Notably, the statement does say the Ukrainian delegation reiterated the Ukrainian people's strong gratitude to President Trump, the U.S. Congress, and the people of the United States for making possible meaningful progress towards peace, which obviously is noteworthy given that Vance accused Zelensky in that meeting of being insufficiently grateful to the United States. And let's also bring in some context here from the Associated Press report on what happened. By the way, we're talking like an 8-hour meeting that went down in Saudi Arabia. This detail I think is really interesting. They're talking about how as this is happening, as negotiators are there, They say the discussion started only hours after Russia shot down over 300 Ukrainian drones. It was Ukraine's biggest attack since the Kremlin ordered the full-scale invasion of its neighbor. Just want to add to that, similarly, as that was happening, the Associated Press says, quote, meanwhile, Russia launched 126 drones and a ballistic missile at Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian Air Force, which the Associated Press says is part of Moscow's relentless pounding of civilian areas during the war. In Moscow, AP continues, Kremlin spokesman said the United States will inform Russia about the results of the talks, which he described as, quote, normal practice. So the question then becomes, obviously, what Russia makes of this deal. This is a 30-day ceasefire that could be extended, according to the statement, and according to the proposal, could be extended with mutual agreement from both parties. So, I mean, this is the start of the end, but it could go south really quickly. Now, Steve Witkoff is expected to be in Moscow in a couple of days, so sometime within this week, where, as the Associated Press says, he could meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to a person familiar with the matter, but not authorized to comment publicly, and the person cautioned that scheduling could change. So what that sounds like is there's a tenuous idea at this point that Witkoff will be there and he'll be able to make this deal with Putin, or he'll be able to sell this deal to Putin. And maybe there will be some changes, and maybe those changes are, minor enough that they're accepted both by the United States and Ukraine, or maybe this is dead on arrival. It doesn't seem like it's dead on arrival. It seems like Witkoff in particular is somebody who has had good luck negotiating with Russia so far. He obviously also immediately, actually even before the administration started, was negotiating with Israel and Hamas over a ceasefire in Gaza. That's hanging in the balance right now, to say the very least. But Trump has a lot of faith in Witkoff, who's a real estate guy, just like Trump is, and comes to this with totally unorthodox methods that are completely abnormal in Washington, but so far appear to be gaining some traction and enjoying some success. So Witkoff's trip to Russia is definitely the thing to watch going forward. But I would just say one thing we're probably not going to hear from a lot of voices in legacy media about all of this is, the idea that Donald Trump was negotiating in public in that Oval Office meeting. Zelensky came to that meeting saying he was on board with that mineral proposal, half the rights to Ukraine's rare earth minerals, as you may remember. And that all goes south during the meeting, and in all likelihood because Donald Trump thought that Zelensky was trying to make him and J.D. Vance look bad. You don't have to agree with that interpretation, but from Donald Trump's perspective, that's sort of what's going on. He's negotiating, and you don't have to like his negotiation tactics. You don't have to think they're particularly clever or necessary, is probably a good way to put that. He also threatened Russia, by the way, just in the last week with sanctions. And, it's confounds the narrative that he's either a Kremlin stooge, as Zelensky has conceded. Trump was sending weapons to Ukraine, where Obama and Biden were hesitant to really arm Ukraine. So it confounds this narrative that Donald Trump has always just been a Russian asset and a stooge. I think more importantly, one of the lessons from this whole dust-up is that we still, as, I guess, a media and a culture, maybe just as the West, are not used to taking a step back and trying to see the forest for the trees when it comes to the way Donald Trump negotiates. Again, we don't have to like it, but it is reasonable to say that sometimes his inflammatory statements, he's using that as leverage, and it's not sincere. It's what he's sincere that he's using it as leverage. So you can be certain that he intends to use these conversations as leverage, but that's also why I think the public challenges that he interpreted from Zelensky were so meaningful in blowing up that deal and getting Zelensky literally sent out of the White House and packing from Washington, D.C., is that Trump sees these negotiations as sort of personal push and pulls, tug of wars between one personality and another personality. And if you get under his skin in that way, you're pretty sure to piss him off. And that's a really great way to scuttle a deal. So again, I think one of the big takeaways, and it's probably not what we're going to hear from a lot of the loudest voices on this issue who were really upset, and I don't think unreasonably so, by the way Donald Trump talked about Zelensky in the middle of this negotiating process, especially at the point where he said that Ukraine shouldn't have started the war. But you can apply this to the tariffs as well. We don't have to like how he's negotiating. I actually think that this unorthodox method, it's sort of the Kissinger-Nixon madman model. You never exactly know what he's going to do, and that gives you leverage in a way that people like Barack Obama probably didn't have it. Talking about like the red line in Syria and all of that, it was just sort of easy for his bluff to be called. I think there's something particularly meaningful about the way that Trump approaches it. But at the same time, I think one of the lessons should be, this is a lesson that should go back, 5 years plus, is that it's not always useful to hyperventilate about things that Donald Trump says in negotiation periods. And I mean that very particularly in the context of when he is literally negotiating things like peace plans. So he's 1 week saying Zelensky is a dictator who started the war, and the next week threatening sanctions on Russia. And in his first term, was talking nice to Putin in press conferences, but then arming Ukraine on the policy front. So I think with Trump in these negotiating phases, we're not used to it. Probably we should be used to it. And it doesn't mean that we can't take issue with certain statements and point out why they're wrong. For example, the one about the war being started, which actually, even by that logic, Trump would say the United States likely has some role in fanning the flames of conflict, as J.D. Vance, in fact, has pointed out at different times. So it's a very interesting, I think, lesson in, dare I say, the art of the deal, which is that Trump is just not like other politicians, as we know, and we can take issue with the things he says. We can say why they're wrong, but it's important, I think, to view them in the context of purely his negotiating style and his tactics. And if he's successful in this case where Joe Biden wasn't, it actually should be a lesson also in the substance, not just the style, but the substance of the way he's approaching these negotiations. So thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you download your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv, there's a special opportunity for our premium subscribers. It's $1 for your first month. This week, we are doing a live taping with Senator Ron Johnson. And if you're a premium subscriber, you get access to an email address where you can email us, send us your questions for Ron Johnson, and I'll try to ask at least one of them in our conversation about the Make America Healthy Again movement. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with more Undercurrents soon.